Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Hello.
Today, we're doing something a little bit different. Usually, we take a topic you might not know much about, right? Some obscure historical event or a complex piece of new tech, and we unpack it for you.
Right.
But today, we are tackling something that every single person listening has lived through. We're taking a huge step back to look at the event that defined the early 2020s.
It's arguably the most significant global event of the 21st century so far. And while we all have our personal memories of it,
We definitely do.
the difference now, a few years on, is that we actually have the data.
Yeah.
We can understand what really happened.
We are talking, of course, about the COVID-19 pandemic, and I know what you're thinking. We all went through it. We remembered the masks, the Zoom happy hours that got awkward after about 20 minutes.
The sourdough starters.
The sourdough starters that we inevitably killed, yes. But here we are. It's February 6, 2026. The dust has settled, and we have this massive stack of encyclopedic records, epidemiological data, economic reports that lets us look at the whole picture in a way we just couldn't when we were in the middle of it.
Exactly. There's a concept historians use called the fog of war.
Right.
When you're in the middle of the battle, you can't see the map. You just see the mud right in front of your face.
For the last, 6 years we've been in that fog?
We have. But now the fog is lifted just enough that we can see the anatomy of the pandemic. We can see how it started, how it mutated, and how it fundamentally reshaped society, economics, and even our biology.
And just to set the stakes here, because I think we can get desensitized to the numbers after seeing them on news tickers for years and years.
Absolutely.
As of today, February 6, 2026, the official death toll stands at over 7.1 million people. That's the number on the dashboard.
It is. But that's where the retrospective data gets.
Yeah.
Well, it gets really difficult and, frankly, quite sobering. That 7.1 million is just the confirmed count. It's the people who got a test, got a diagnosis, and their death was officially recorded as being from COVID-19.
Okay, so what's the real number?
When you look at the estimates of the true toll, and this means factoring in excess mortality.
People who died but weren't tested, or maybe died because the hospitals were full.
Exactly. All of that. When you factor that in, the estimates range significantly higher. We're looking at somewhere between 18.2 million on the low end and 33.5 million deaths on the high end.
33.5 million. That's hard to even wrap your head around.
That's staggering.
It's the population of a large country, just gone.
It puts COVID-19 as the fifth deadliest pandemic or epidemic in all of recorded history.
Wow.
It sits there in the history books alongside the plague of Justinian and the 1918 flu.
Right.
This wasn't just a bad flu season, it was a historical pivot point for the human species.
So our mission today is to move past that daily news cycle that we all doom scroll through.
Well.
We want to understand the mechanics of this thing. We have records covering epidemiology, virology, economics. We're going to unpack all of it. We need to understand the biology of the virus, the psychology of our response, and the sociology of the aftermath.
We need to strip it down to the studs.
Let's start at the very beginning, or at least what we thought was the beginning. Section 1, origins and the name game.
Right.
Now, the story we were all told, the official start, was December 2019 in Wuhan, China. A cluster of pneumonia cases with an unknown cause.
That's right. On December 31st, 2019, the WHO, the World Health Organization, was formally notified about this cluster. That's the date that's etched in the timeline. It's when the bureaucratic clock started ticking.
But like with most things in science, when you look closer, the biological clock had actually started ticking much, much earlier.
A lot earlier.
Right, because we have this concept of the official start versus the likely start. How do we even know it started earlier? It's not like we have a time machine.
In a way, we kind of do. We have something called molecular clock analysis.
Okay, you have to unpack that for us. It sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
It's actually pretty standard evolutionary biology. Viruses, you see, they mutate at a relatively constant rate.
Okay.
So think of it like a ticking clock. Every time the virus replicates and jumps from one person to the next, there's a chance for a little genetic typo, a mutation.
Right.
By looking at the genetics of the virus samples from, say, January 2020, and comparing them to samples from June 2020, scientists can rewind that clock. They can calculate how long it would have taken for those specific mutations to accumulate.
So you're basically tracing the family tree of the virus back to the great-grandfather virus.
Precisely. And when you run that analysis on SARS-CoV-2, It suggests that human-to-human transmission likely started as early as October or November of 2019.
October, November. So it was circulating for months before the alarm was really sounded.
It's very possible. The virus was likely ghosting through the population, being mistaken for a bad cold or a nasty flu.
And we have other evidence for this, right? It's not just the genetic modeling.
Correct. We have retrospective testing that supports this idea. Researchers went back and tested old samples from patients in France.
Old samples.
Yeah, samples taken from people who were hospitalized with pneumonia before we even knew what COVID-19 was. They went back to the freezers. And they found a confirmed case dating all the way back to December 27, 2019.
Wait, in France? In December?
In a Parisian suburb, yes.
That really changes the narrative of containment, doesn't it? I mean, I remember watching the news in January 2020, seeing the lockdown in Wuhan, and thinking, well, it's over there. If they just lock down the city, we'll be fine.
And that was the fatal flaw in our collective thinking. By the time we were watching that lockdown on TV, the virus had likely already boarded several international flights. It was already in Europe.
And in the U.S. too, right?
Yes, there was also a death in the United States on February 6, 2020, which at the time was much earlier than the initial timeline suggested. The virus was just moving so much faster than our ability to detect it.
So by the time we saw the smoke, the fire was already out of control.
By the time we saw the fire, the sparks had already landed in dry grass all over the world.
And speaking of seeing the fire, we have to talk about the people who tried to sound the alarm early on, the whistleblowers.
Yes, this is a really tragic part of the early timeline. In early January, before the official public pivot from the authorities, there were doctors in Wuhan seeing this pneumonia of unknown cause.
Right.
They were looking at CT scans of lungs that looked suspiciously like SARS from 2003. One of the most famous of these doctors was Dr. Li Wenliang.
I remember his name. He wasn't even an infectious disease expert, was he? He was an eye doctor?
An ophthalmologist, correct. But he saw the reports from his colleagues, and he posted in a private chat group with his medical school alumni.
What did he say?
It was basically a warning. He said, wear protective gear, there's a SARS-like virus spreading. Just a heads up to his friends.
And the response from the local authorities was not great.
Not to investigate, but to silence.
Yeah.
Exactly. He and 7 other doctors were detained by the police. They were forced to sign these statements admitting to spreading false rumors and severely disturbing social order.
False rumors. That is just chilling in retrospect.
It really highlights that fundamental tension between public health and information control. And the story gets worse.
He contracted the virus himself.
He did. He contracted it from a patient and tragically passed away in February 2020. His death sparked this massive outpouring of grief and anger, not just in China, but globally. It became this symbol, a wake-up call, that the systems that were meant to protect us were in fact failing.
It really set the tone for all the confusion that followed. And speaking of confusion, let's talk about the name.
Yes.
Because I feel like for the first few months, nobody knew what to call this thing. It was the coronavirus, the Wuhan virus, 2019, and COVID.
Nomenclature in science is actually a really serious business. You're right. Initially, it was just Wuhan pneumonia or Wuhan coronavirus. We have a habit of doing that.
Sure, Lyme disease is named after Old Lyme, Connecticut. Ebola is named after a river.
Exactly. But we've learned there's a lot of collateral damage that comes with that.
So why did we stop?
Because of the stigma. In 2015, the World Health Organization issued a new set of guidelines, specifically for naming infectious diseases. The goal was to avoid names that stigmatize geographic locations or animals or specific groups of people.
Right. If you call it the Wuhan virus, you stigmatize the people of Wuhan. It hurts their economy, their tourism, their people, even if they did absolutely nothing wrong.
Or animals. Remember swine flu?
I do, and people stopped buying pork.
Exactly, even though you cannot get swine flu from eating cooked pork.
Yeah.
The name itself caused economic devastation for farmers for no scientific reason at all. So they needed a neutral, descriptive name.
So on February 11th, 2020, the WHO announced the official names. Let's break them down because I think people still get the two confused sometimes.
It's an important distinction. The virus itself is SARS-CoV-2.
Okay, what does that stand for?
Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus 2. The name indicates that it's a genetic cousin of the original SARS virus from the 2003 outbreak.
And the disease, the sickness you actually get from the virus, is COVID-19.
Which is an acronym. KO for corona, VI for virus, D for disease, and 19 for 2019, the year was first identified.
Simple. COVID-19. It's definitely cleaner than 2019 uncov acute respiratory disease, which was the mouthful they were using before that.
And it successfully divorced the name from a specific place, which is absolutely crucial when you need global cooperation to fight something.
Okay, so we have the name, we have the timeline pushing back into late 2019. Now let's get into the beast itself, Section 2. The biology of an invisible enemy.
Right.
What made this particular virus so good at shutting down the entire world? Why was this so different from SARS or MERS?
It was a perfect storm of transmission mechanics. I mean, a truly perfect storm. Initially, the public health advice was heavily focused on droplets and fomites.
Fomites, so surfaces.
Surfaces, exactly. Remember wiping down your groceries.
Oh, I remember leaving my Amazon packages in the garage for 3 days to decontaminate. We were scrubbing our mail with Clorox wipes. It seems kind of crazy now.
And while surface transmission is, theoretically possible, the data now shows overwhelmingly that the primary driver was airborne particles, aerosols.
This was a huge, huge shift in understanding, wasn't it? Can you explain the difference between a droplet and an aerosol for us?
Sure. Think of a droplet like a tiny projectile. If I sneeze, a big droplet flies out, but it's heavy. Gravity wins, and it falls to the ground within a few feet.
Okay.
But an aerosol is microscopic. It's so small and light that it doesn't just fall. It behaves like smoke.
Smoke is a great analogy. If someone is smoking a cigarette on the other side of a room, you can smell it everywhere, even if you're 20 feet away.
Precisely. And that was the terrifying realization. If the virus hangs in the air like smoke,
Yeah.
it means being in a poorly ventilated room with an infected person is a high risk, even if you stay 6 feet apart.
So all that tape on the floor of the grocery store?
It helped with droplets, but it didn't do anything for aerosols. It meant that ventilation opening windows using air filters was infinitely more important than scrubbing your apples.
And the symptoms, they weren't just the standard flu stuff. I mean, sure, there was the fever, the fatigue, the cough, but there was that one symptom that was so weirdly specific.
The loss of smell and taste, anosmia, and ageusia.
It became the telltale sign. You'd hear from friends, I think I have it. I can't taste my morning coffee. It just tastes like hot water.
It was reported in up to 88% of cases in some of the early studies. It really distinguished it from the flu or the common cold. We learned the virus directly attacks the supporting cells in the nose that help your neurons detect scent.
But the real superpower of this virus, if you want to call it that, wasn't about the people who lost their sense of smell. It was about the people who felt nothing at all.
Asymptomatic spread. This was the Trojan horse of the pandemic.
How so?
With the original SARS in 2003, people were generally most infectious when they were very, very sick, when they were coughing, with high fevers.
So you could identify them. You see a sick person, you isolate them. Problem solved, more or less.
Exactly. You could effectively stop SARS with thermometers at airports. With COVID-19, people were shedding the virus, breathing it out, for days before they had any symptoms. Or, in many cases, they never developed symptoms at all.
So you could feel perfectly fine, go to a dinner party, have a great time, and have no idea you've just infected everyone at the table.
That is what made it impossible to stop at the borders. You can't use a thermometer to check someone who doesn't have a fever yet. The enemy was invisible.
And on top of all that, the virus didn't stay still. It evolved.
Viruses mutate. That's just what they do to survive. It's natural selection on hyperspeed. And this brings us to the variants.
The Greek alphabet soup. Alpha, beta, gamma.
And again, you'll note the naming convention. We stopped using the stigmatizing country names like the UK variant or the South African variant and switched to the neutral Greek letters.
And there were two big shifts in that alphabet that really changed the game, right? The first was Delta.
Delta was a real turning point in terms of severity.
Mm-hmm.
It emerged, and it showed us that the virus could actually get meaner. It was significantly more transmissible than the original strain, and it hit people a lot harder.
That was the variant that really strained healthcare systems to the breaking point.
Absolutely. We saw it in India and later across the West. It was brutal. And then, just when we thought we were getting a handle on Delta, came Omicron. Omicron appeared in late 2021, identified in Botswana and South Africa. And it wasn't just another step in evolution. It was an evolutionary leap. It was so much more infectious than Delta. It just spread like absolute wildfire.
I remember when Omicron hit, it felt like everyone I knew got it within the same 3-week period.
That is completely reflected in the data. Omicron became the dominant lineage incredibly quickly, and it spawned all these subvariants like BA.1 through BA.5.
It seemed less severe, though, for many people.
On a case-by-case basis, yes, it often was. And that was partly due to the massive wall of immunity we had built up from vaccines and prior infections. But the sheer volume of cases was so overwhelming that it still put immense pressure on hospitals.
This brings us to the numbers game. The source material mentions R0, or R naught? Let's break that down.
The basic reproduction number. It's a key concept in epidemiology. It represents the average number of people that one infected person will pass the virus on to, assuming a completely susceptible population with no immunity.
And in the beginning, we thought this number was pretty low, didn't we?
Deceptively low. The initial estimate back in January 2020 put the R0 somewhere between 1.4 and 2.5.
Which is bad, but it's in the same ballpark as the seasonal flu. It seems manageable.
Or so we thought. But subsequent analysis, once the real-world data really started pouring in, suggested the R0 was actually much, much higher, closer to 5.7.
5.7. So one person infects almost 6 other people.
And then those 6 infect 36, and those 36 infect over 200. That is the math of explosive exponential growth. If your R0 is near 6, you are not dealing with a campfire. You are dealing with a wildfire in a dry forest. You cannot stop it with half measures.
So we have a highly contagious airborne virus that spreads before you know you have it, and it multiplies exponentially. No wonder the world just hit the brakes.
Yeah.
This leads us right into Section 3, the global STARP and the response.
It was an incredible moment. The response was unprecedented in human history.
Yeah.
And we saw 2 main competing philosophies emerge on how to handle this wildfire.
Suppression versus mitigation.
Or, as most of us knew them, zero COVID versus flattening the curve.
Let's start with zero COVID.
Zero COVID was the strategy of complete elimination. Think of China or New Zealand in the early days. The goal was to get cases down to 0 and keep them there through incredibly strict border quarantines, mass testing, and immediate snap lockdowns if even a single case appeared.
An eradication strategy.
Exactly. And then you had flattening the curve, which was the strategy for most of the rest of the world.
What was the thinking there?
It was a tacit admission that we probably couldn't eliminate it. It was already too widespread by the time we acted. But the goal was to slow it down, to spread the infections out over a longer period of time so that our hospitals wouldn't completely collapse under the strain.
And the main tool for both of these strategies was the lockdown.
The lockdown. By April of 2020, just a few months in, more than half of the world's population, that's 3.9 billion people, were under some form of lockdown. A global pause button had been pressed.
And the silence. I remember the silence in the cities. The source material has a term for this, the anthropause.
It's a fascinating term, isn't it? A temporary but massive drop in human activity.
And the environment reacted almost immediately, didn't it?
It was stunning. We saw a 26% drop in coal consumption in China. NASA satellite imagery showed nitrogen dioxide levels, that's a major pollutant from traffic and industry, just plummeting over major cities. The skies literally cleared up.
It was more than just clear skies, though.
Oh yeah. Seismometers, the instruments that measure earthquakes, actually picked up less vibration from the Earth's crust because there were fewer cars, trucks, and trains moving around.
The Earth literally got quieter.
It did. But while the skies were clearing, the global economy was crashing. It was the largest global recession since the Great Depression. It wasn't even close, and supply chains just shattered.
I think everyone remembers the panic buying.
The toilet paper.
The toilet paper, the canned goods, the flour.
The toilet paper was the visible symptom of the problem. But the real crisis was invisible in things like semiconductor chips.
Right. Suddenly you couldn't buy a new car or a gaming console or even some home appliances for 2 years.
That supply chain chaos was a direct result of that global stop. We all learned how fragile our just-in-time economy really was. We had traded resilience for efficiency, and when the system broke, we had no buffer.
And for those of us lucky enough to keep our jobs, the very location of work changed forever. The explosion of telework.
Remote work? It went from a niche perk for some tech companies to the standard operating procedure for millions overnight.
It completely changed the definition of the workplace.
It did. And we're still seeing the ripple effects of that in 2026.
Yeah.
With the crisis in commercial real estate and the decentralization of cities.
But while we were all sitting at home baking sourdough and trying to find a webcam that wasn't sold out, the scientific community was running the race of a lifetime.
The vaccine.
This really is the bright spot in the data.
It's an incredible story. The speed was just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Usually, vaccines take years, sometimes a decade or more. The mumps vaccine was the previous record holder at 4 years.
4 years. And for COVID.
We had multiple vaccines being rolled out in December 2020.
Yeah.
That is less than a year after the virus was even identified.
How is that even possible? I remember so many people being skeptical, saying it was rushed, that corners must have been cut.
It wasn't magic, and it wasn't rushed. It was prepared science. The development was massively accelerated by all the existing research on the original SARS and on MERS.
So scientists had already been studying this family of viruses for years.
For decades, they knew the spike protein was the key, the
Okay.
target. And crucially, they had been working on mRNA technology for a very long time. It was a platform just waiting for a purpose.
So they had the DVD player ready, they just needed to pop in the new disc.
That is a perfect analogy. As soon as the genetic code of SARS-CoV-2 was published online in January 2020, they essentially downloaded it and plugged it into their existing mRNA platform. They had the design for the vaccine within days,
And the rest of the time was just testing.
testing for safety and efficacy. The trials were huge and rigorous, but they were run concurrently instead of sequentially to save time. No steps were skipped, they were just overlapped.
And the impact, we have hard numbers on how many lives were saved.
We do. The estimates suggest that vaccines from Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and others saved between 14.4 and 19.8 million lives.
Wow.
And that's just in the first year of the rollout. Nearly 20 million people are walking around today because of that science.
That's incredible. That's the population of the entire state of New York. But we can't talk about the triumph of the vaccine without talking about the inequality.
No, we absolutely can't.
Yeah.
It was a major moral failure of the global response. We saw what many people called vaccine apartheid, meaning high-income countries were buying up all the supply, they were vaccinating healthy teenagers and children, and talking about second boosters, while low-income nations were struggling to get even a first dose for their frontline health workers and their most vulnerable elderly citizens.
It highlighted the global divide in a very stark, very painful way.
It really did.
So we have the virus, the lockdown, the vaccine. Let's look at where we are now. Section 4, the aftermath and the end.
And that question of when does a pandemic end is actually a very complicated one.
I think we were all waiting for some kind of V-Day declaration, like the end of a war, a big announcement. But it never really came.
Well, on May 5, 2023, the WHO did declare that the public health emergency of international concern was over. But, and this is the crucial part, they explicitly stated that the pandemic was not over.
That feels contradictory. How can the emergency be over, but the pandemic isn't?
It highlights the definition problem. There is no biological on-off switch where the virus just vanishes from the earth. It transitions to what we call endemicity.
Meaning it becomes part of the furniture.
Exactly. Like the seasonal flu or the common cold, it's always there, circulating at some baseline level.
So the end isn't a biological event.
Experts note that the end of a pandemic is often a social phenomenon, not a biological one. It ends when society collectively decides to accept the risk and get back to normal life.
So the virus is still there, it's still making people sick, it's still killing people, but we stop treating it as an all-consuming emergency.
The panic ends, even if the disease doesn't.
And for many, many people, it hasn't ended at all because of the long-term scars.
Yeah.
We have to talk about long COVID.
This is the lingering shadow of the pandemic. Long COVID is defined as consequences that persist long after the initial recovery period. New or returning health problems that can go on for months or even years.
How prevalent is it? How many people are we talking about?
The estimates vary wildly, which just shows how much we still have to learn. But studies suggest it affects somewhere between 5% and maybe as high as 50% of patients who get infected.
That is a massive range, but even at the low end, at 5%, that's millions and millions of people.
It's a mass disabling event. And the symptoms are just debilitating. Crippling fatigue, shortness of breath, heart palpitations, and this cognitive dysfunction people call brain fog.
Brain fog, yes. People struggling to find words or concentrate.
We're seeing people drop out of the workforce because they physically cannot do their jobs anymore. We are still trying to quantify the economic and social cost of this.
And it's not just physical health. The mental health toll was global.
Absolutely. We saw global increases in anxiety and depression across the board. And there are other long-term ripples, like this idea of an immunity debt or immunity gap.
Right, the triple-demic we saw a couple of winters ago.
Exactly. Because we were all isolated for so long, our immune systems weren't getting their usual workout. We missed our routine exposures to other bugs like RSV and the flu.
So our immune systems were out of practice.
They were. So when we finally opened everything back up, all of these viruses that had been suppressed came roaring back and hit us all at once.
We also saw a drop in routine vaccinations for children for things like measles. We're still playing catch up on that.
The tail of this pandemic is very, very long.
So let's try to summarize this deep dive. We lived through a genuine historical pivot point, the 5th deadliest pandemic ever recorded.
It completely reshaped our economies. It normalized remote work for a huge portion of the population, and it advanced vaccine science at a record-breaking speed.
But it also exposed these deep vulnerabilities in our supply chains, in our healthcare systems, and in our social equity.
And it showed us, in no uncertain terms, that biology does not respect borders.
And here's the thought I want to leave you with today, pulled from our source material. It mentions that an epidemic's end is often a social phenomenon, not just a biological one. So if the virus is still circulating, still killing thousands of people, still disabling people with long COVID, have we actually beaten the pandemic, or have we just collectively decided to stop paying attention to it?
That is the uncomfortable question, isn't it? Are we actually safe, or are we just tired of being scared?
Something to chew on. Thank you for listening to this deep dive into the COVID-19 pandemic. Stay curious, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.